Sucio Talk. We're out here at Hoopes Vineyard. Are we in Yountville? Technically? No, we're not. We're not claiming Yountville just yet. Hoopes Vineyard. We are hanging out here in Yountville. You see how when I move, there's no live. Hoopes Vineyard, next to Yountville. What is the address here?
6204 Washington Street.
6204 Washington Street. And there's some people here having tastings?
No.
No?
Not tastings. We do bottle service.
Ooh, bottle service. Okay. Got you.
We are a very laid back, accessible luxury. So
right.
You can come here, grab a bottle of wine, enjoy your environs. We are not a formal tasting facility.
Right. Okay. And what made you go away from the traditional?
Well, for one, I think anybody who gets into the business has to lean into their authenticity.
Right.
So I don't want to do everything the way that everybody does it because that's what happens. Mm-hmm. But I also was really trying to embody what Napa used to look like in the 1980s. Mm-hmm. So when I was growing up, Napa was a very family-friendly place. Napa was a very approachable place, and people could come and enjoy the gardens without a lot of the formalities. They could enjoy looking at the grape farming without feeling like they were being shuttled through a very specific experience. And I think the other reason is that what we learned during COVID, which, you know, was a trend that we were already sort of embracing, was that a lot of people want to travel with their children.
Yeah.
And people want to, you know, sort of make their own adventure, go out, and if they want to ask questions about the wine,
they will,
and get sophisticated, they will. But if they don't necessarily want to be talked at when they're enjoying things. And so locals have been really big supporters of our concept here, which I think a lot of locals would say most tasting experiences or most wineries alienate them because it's not an experience because they're in the industry that they would necessarily do on a regular basis. Right. They come here. You know, they come here with their families, their friends. It's the first thing that comes to mind when they want to grab a bottle of wine.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And this is a family business.
It is a family business.
Your dad started this?
Well, the Oasis concept is very much
your baby. Got you.
But yeah, we've been in the business since the early 1980s. My father started as a grape grower, and then we started making wine. The first vintage was 1999.
Okay.
And, you know, he sort of got into the industry by happenstance, kismet. We purchased a parcel in Yountville in the early 1980s. Yeah. And it was, you know, it was lucky. It turned into the epicenter of Cabernet on the one side. And we were so close to Yountville that became a culinary mecca and destination.
Okay.
And so we were sort of in the thick of things and what really put Napa on the map. And people approached him to use his name as a single vineyard designate. And he said, well, if somebody thinks my name is worth putting on a bottle of wine, I might as well do it myself. And so that's how the Hoopes brand was born. But I didn't get involved in the wine business until about 12 years ago. So much
Got
later.
It. All right. Well, you know, here on Sucio Talk, we take it all the way back. Where were we born?
I was born in San Francisco.
Ooh, Frisco.
Children's Hospital.
Really?
Which used to be on California Street. And is no more.
Oh, it's no more.
No more.
Is like the building still there, or is it
Yes.
crushed? Okay. What is it now?
Yes, the building's still there. And in fact, they do still do some children's pediatric stuff there. And so both of my boys had to go there for some studies, which was a real, you know, cycle back to the past.
Okay. Got you. That's crazy. Taking it all the way back. Born in San Francisco.
1981.
How was the upbringing in Frisco then?
San Francisco, I mean, the people who were born there and the true locals from back in that era remember a very happy time, a very community-driven place. And I ultimately grew up between San Francisco and Napa because similar to today, Napa was a one industry town. It's even more so in some respects today, although there's more of that industry.
Yeah.
And so my mom had to work in San Francisco to pursue her vocation. And so I grew up in between the two. And I mean, I loved San Francisco. It was a place of bohemians, and my grandmother was an artist. My grandmother went to the first Burning Man. I mean,
Oh,
she
really?
was, yeah,
Damn.
she was a real trailblazer. And she lived in walking distance to the Opera House. She refused to leave San Francisco because she wanted to be able to be in the culture.
Right.
And there were so many fun neighborhoods. I mean, a lot of them still exist, but they're just very different than they were back in the day. So I think San Francisco, you know, it's amazing in spite of itself, because I think because it's so beautiful and because it continues to attract so many people and so much talent, we have never really looked that hard at how to fix the problems in San Francisco. And those, unfortunately, have just continued to grow and outpace, I think, the draw to San Francisco from a residential perspective.
Yeah. Well, you were, you know, when you were growing up, the tech boom was just like beginning in that area of the world. Is that a prominent thing when you were growing up? Like, did you tech, like it's this thing, or was it still like underground a little bit?
Well, tech didn't start until way later.
Right.
So, you know, I mean, I obviously lived in San Francisco and had deep roots there in the first .com boom, and then ultimately, you know, was there again in 2008 with the financial crisis. But, you know, I mean, San Francisco, I think, you know, has always been a hotbed of innovation, and that became tech and innovation. And, you know, people really leaned into the location as somewhere where you could get financing for those things, and where the greatest minds in tech ended up basically laying down their roots. And so, you know, people just kept coming and coming and coming and reinventing what tech meant. So it's always defined the city to some extent, because it really is the birthplace, but it really took over the city in a lot of ways. And I think it pushed out a lot of the other industry, of course, that actually used to be there when I was growing up. It was much more diverse. And Napa was too. I mean, Napa was a diverse agricultural region that morphed into a monoculture of wine. And so today, I think, honestly, the county makes a huge error in only supporting the wine industry and making it impossible to do any other form of agriculture. Part of that's consumers. You know, people are willing to pay more for wine grapes because people are willing to pay money for wine. And so it is a much more valuable commodity. And so a lot of what you used to see in Napa doesn't exist anymore.
Did you spend time in Napa when you were a kid growing up in the city? Was it something they talked about?
Oh, I was here every weekend and then every summer.
Okay, got it.
So the main reason that we commuted back and forth is because of my mom's job. So I would commute in for school, and my grandmother lived there. So we spent a lot of time in the city, and my parents moved full time to Napa when I entered high school. Okay. And at that point in time, my parents were like, we're not driving to San Francisco anymore. And
like, we're done with that.
We're done with that. Yeah. And, you know, I mean, when you're in high school, you want to be around your friends, you want to be around sports. And so I ended up going to boarding school in Massachusetts. And I thought,
what town in Mass?
Andover, Mass.
Ooh, Andover, Mass.
I did not expect.
Was it boarding school because you were a bad kid?
Well, yes and no.
What were you like as a teenager? Were you like goth, punk? Were you being a rebel? Like, what were you, you know?
I don't think I was ever really that excited.
Right.
I'm pretty...
were you like nerdy in high school? Or like just like the study, or what were you into?
Sports? I've always been pretty nerdy.
Okay.
But I think I've always walked this interesting line of being extroverted, loving to be around people, loving to be sort of the center of the party, but also being the nerd. So those two things don't work in... you know, until I think you become an adult and it somehow, you know, you can be yourself.
You find your footing.
Absolutely.
Right. I think when you're younger, they tell you like, you can be this or that. You can't be both.
Yeah. And I think it's just, you know, they're just inconsistent, because to be a partier and sort of do the things you're not really supposed to do when you're in high school, you aren't usually studying. So I was everybody's like homework lady. You know, it's like,
were you making money off of it at least?
No, I was not. I was not that industrious.
You weren't a hustler then.
Maybe I was a hustler. I thought it was my ticket to the party.
Yeah. Okay. There you go. Then your parents were like, too much partying, too much homework, go to boarding school. What's boarding school like?
I loved boarding school. Right. I mean, really what happened is I threw a very large party. I lived nearby a number of very popular boys in high school.
Okay.
And they knew my parents were going out of town. So they said, well,
Lindsay, if you want to hang, do our homework and.
Basically, that's kind of exactly how it went. And of course, all my girlfriends who were, innocent freshmen said, well, Lindsay, you're going to be committing social suicide if you don't do it. If you don't have this party. So I was also naive and didn't realize what, a quote high school party really looked like. I grew up as an only child and lived mostly in the country on the weekends. So I would pick up stray animals and I was, playing out in the creek by myself all the time. We'd set up tents. I'd go, hiking. I mean, to me, that was, a party was much more innocent than, city parties and high school parties. And so it very quickly morphed into something that was well out of my intention.
It got crazy.
Yeah. And then, of course, Napa's a small place. So the sheriff, finds out how to tell your father exactly what you're doing the whole time. And that was that. So my father said, well, I'll do you a favor. You can go to boarding school. And I said, well, this is my ticket out. This is great.
Yeah.
I'm going to go as far away as possible. And so there was a movie at the time or a TV show called Party of Five. And the youngest girl ends up going to Andover.
Okay.
And so I was like, oh, perfect.
You were like, I can go the same place she goes.
Absolutely. Well, it was the only one I'd heard of.
Did it look like in the show?
Well, she gets a brochure. I mean, I don't think they visited the thing, but it was a name and it was a place.
LA, David.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know. Well, the show took place in San Francisco, and so I felt connected to Claudia, and I don't know.
Yeah.
It was like, fine, I've picked a place.
Were you a badass in the high school you were going to? Because they're like, dude, she threw a party, and then her parents put her in boarding school in Massachusetts.
Well,
were you like a legend?
I mean, it was definitely exotic to come from California where, like they had marijuana and all these things that, like on the East Coast, people haven't heard of a lot of this stuff. I was like,
what is wine?
I was like, you've never seen weed? Like you don't drink wine at every dinner? Like you're not, brown all the time? Like you don't have sun?
Literally.
And I hadn't seen snow.
That's
so of course for me,
right there.
Yeah. So I got there a year that was an incredibly snowy year. It was a nor'easter and I was in a world of hurt. I was like, well, how do you get from your dorm to class? They're like, you shovel? I was like, shovel? Like, I've never had to shovel snow. I've seen snow, but I was like, why would you do that? And they're like, because that's how you get rid of snow. And I was like, why would people live here? It doesn't make any sense to me. But I loved the seasons and I grew to really appreciate Massachusetts is a fun place. There's so much history at Andover. And I can easily say today that even though, let's say Rebellion took me to Andover initially, it became probably the best decision that I didn't make, I guess, in my life.
And so when you say boarding school, what exactly is the boarding part about? Is that you live there? That's it.
You live there, you eat there. Some people probably feel imprisoned there. I think it just depends.
Do you sneak out? Is there any of that? Is there any subculture, dark web of, can you get drugs?
I mean, I think at every boarding school there is some of that, but it's definitely tempered as compared to what you can get in high school. So it functions like every high school. It's just that because it's more restrictive, I think that it's not as easy to do those things. There's a lot more monitoring by a lot more parents. The rules are stricter. I think you have a second chance policy there. But you live there and you have to check in at 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. on Fridays and Saturdays. So you're not driving yourselves. You're not going into the city. You don't have access to urban environments.
Does your family come visit you?
They can come visit you during some holidays.
Right.
But usually an East Coast family tends to adopt you because I lived so far away. So my roommate and best friend was from New York. So for 3-day weekends, we would fly up to New York. And back then, actually getting around the East Coast is easier anyway.
Yeah,
I mean, you can take trains, you can take buses, planes.
They got their shit figured out over there.
Absolutely.
In terms of that.
It drives me bananas. It shows how inefficient a government can be that they cannot figure out how to get a train system operating on the west coast of California. It's ridiculous.
Like the UK, they have the best one as far as I'm concerned.
They've had a bullet train in Japan since the 50s.
There you
Give
go.
me a break.
There you go.
But, and then, Californians are so proud of how environmental they are. And I was like, except that we pollute because everyone has to have their own car and they can't figure out how to get a train.
Yeah, you can't be sustainable anymore. I don't care. I don't think that living is sustainable. Like once you just create waste. That's all we do all day long, Well, and I don't, during COVID, I also kind of came up with this conspiracy theory that somehow mail order companies like Amazon were behind COVID because they wanted everybody to start not going to the end of their street to buy the simplest of things. And I'm guilty of it too. But, it's amazing. We get everything shipped to us these days. And Napa's a little bit more immune. But I mean, I have friends who come to Napa and expect that they have the conveniences of an app to bring them anything they want. And, people just aren't thinking about that convenience comes with it, the impact of transportation to execute that convenience. Somebody is driving a toothbrush to you, and that's crazy.
You're not walking to the corner store. I mean, it's gas, it's shipping, it's, excess packaging waste. I mean, it's a lot of things that, we could definitely avoid. And you go to Europe, like your point, and they just have all of that way more dialed in, and people are much more aware and conscious of the waste that they produce, and they work on restricting it. So which is why, we try to keep this a zero waste facility. So we upcycle a lot of our wine bottles into candles. We upcycle wine into food products. So anything that's not suitable for wine per se, but is still a great use, or, can be used in a number of other things. We've turned it into vinegar and turned those into shrubs and interesting, food products that we can consume in different ways. We don't want to waste anything here.
Definitely not. And so you're growing up very much like within Napa, right? So you're like knowing about wine growing up. What are you thinking is your career when you're like in school? Any of that? Like, what are your interests? Like, what did you want to do?
I always wanted to be a spy.
Okay.
Actually.
Like in the CIA.
Well, this actually goes back to when I was about 5 years old. I didn't really know the agency names, but I remember I was very into the Nancy Drew books, and I was totally fascinated by anything that took place in a courtroom or the FBI. I loved Silence of the Lambs. I loved movies that, had undercover agents, and I just, the idea of espionage and Bond, I just thought it was fun and exciting.
Love Bond.
I mean, amazing.
That's my favorite. Yeah.
And I used to watch that a lot with my dad. So we would.
What's your favorite Bond?
Well, Sean Connery.
Okay. And then movie?
That is such a tough one.
I know, it really is. Yeah.
That's a tough one because, when you go back to watch them, they feel so dated.
There definitely are, but they're still so good.
They are still so good.
And I learn new things about just like life through watching them. You know what I'm saying?
Totally.
Like that pickup line works, and obviously it's a movie, but you're like, I bet you that works.
Well, it works for Bond. I mean,
you
no
have
offense.
to have a gun.
I mean, David, I was like Anna Martini.
Yeah,
apparently
right.
Anna Martini. I think Goldfinger. I mean. Yeah. I don't know. I think that was my favorite. Really cool experience. We just were in Washington, D.C. a couple of weeks ago. I was there with an organization that I work really closely with. We rented out the entire Spy Museum.
What?
And they had a special, all the Bond cars from all the movies were there. And we got to go and actually
Who
see
owns
them.
those cars? Like the studio?
Or
like
I think it's
collectors?
the studio. I actually think it's probably both.
Okay. That always fascinates me because I know I've heard the story of there's a movie studio. I think it's MGM. And the guy sold it for a lot of money, and then they basically mismanaged it, lost a bunch of money, and he would buy it back. I think he did it like 3 times. He would like sell it and then buy it back for less than he sold it for, and basically he would just liquidate everything. and when you would get there and make a movie, so they had all the Wizard of Oz costumes and shit. And he's like, what are we still doing? Like, sell it. You know what I mean? And I think that those are the most successful businesses, is when you can just be like, I know that this was valuable, but we got to sell it. And I think that is what you do in wine. You make this beautiful vintage, and I'm sure you have last bottles of stuff that you're like, no, save it. But it's like, fuck it, drink it.
Well, I was just going to say that actually, so my dad almost passed away. I ended up back in the wine business because my dad almost passed away about 12 years ago. And so I think I always expected to get into the wine industry at some point, and it was actually my first job. But to that point that you just brought up, when my dad was sick, he had a huge wine collection that he hadn't really touched. And because of all the medication and everything that he ended up having to take, he's still alive, and he really beat a tremendous odds. And so he follows all the rules now because he feels like he's been given a second chance. Yeah. But he was always very healthy, but he doesn't want to play with fire. So what he told me, and I thought was really interesting, is like, what are we waiting for? I mean, life really is so short. And the beauty about wine is it enhances every emotional moment that we have. Yeah. So we can have burgers on Memorial Day weekend, but we open that bottle of wine and that creates some sort of emotional connection to that memory that is really more powerful when wine is involved. And there's usually a story, and because it's a wine we made, for example, or wine that I collected from my trip to Napa or my trip to Italy, we talk about that and we make that part of the memory. And so wine has a very special place in, I think, not only dining, but in experiences. And so I don't think it's worth waiting for the quote right experience. I think a way to look at it is that it's going to make every experience that you have that much more exciting. Right. And so pop it out and create one.
Yeah, for sure. Sometimes I look, he had a great wine library, and it's always post hummus, but I'm like, so he never didn't drink any of it? Like, what the fuck is that? I don't know. Like, come on, man.
I know. It is amazing that, I experienced it with my mother too. When she passed away, she had collected so many amazing things she was a very fashionable hoarder, I guess you could say it, but she had tons and tons of things in storage. She had about 7 storage units. And I think it was always with this idea of like, I'm going to create something eventually. And, it never happened. And she created so many things throughout her life. I'm not saying this to say she was, not accomplished, but I do think that, we spend so much time thinking about what will be and not enough time enjoying. And that's an obvious statement, I guess we all realize, but what is, and wine is one of those things that, I get it. Save a couple really special bottles, but, so if you have a bottle that you really want to save, buy 2 and, drink 1 and surprise yourselves. Yeah. We used to do, I remember in Napa, when I was in DC for a while, my father had brought all of these really beautiful magnums of 1982. And I hadn't paid much attention, but of course, 1982 was one of the most famous vintages in France, in Bordeaux. And the fact that I had these wines was pretty crazy given my age. And I would bring them to these brown bag dinners, 1982 Chateau Margaux. People were like, what the heck? Like, how did you get that? And I was like, I know, but you're never going to ever taste it again in your life. Right. And we just happened to have it because my dad was in the wine industry. And back then, those things were not necessarily easy to get, but they weren't as untouchable as they are today. Right. So my dad started collecting, he bought my birth year, which he says was a failure of a vintage. Although
only thing good to come out of it was you.
Yeah, but I don't know why he blamed me. I was like, well, you could have picked the year. Right, buddy, right.
That's funny.
That's not my fault that you didn't align with the best vintage in Bordeaux. That's all you.
It's all right. I think he did a pretty good job.
Yeah. And they do say 1981s are outperforming 82s these days. So
really,
I'll take it.
Well, it ebbs and flows, so things get better, things get worse, trends happen, Well,
and to that point, wine, I think one of the magic things about wine is that wine is a living product. Yeah. So unlike spirits that really, once you put it in the bottle, that's what it is. It ages in barrel. And so it gets a lot of that, let's say, unique character from whatever happens before it it gets to the bottling line. But in wine, why I think winemakers are such incredible visionaries is because they have to anticipate how that wine is going to evolve for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And it is supposed to change. It's not supposed to stay static, and it's supposed to have those valleys and peaks. And, you know, I think part of it is, of course, that's why you have to age wine properly. But another part is that wine is supposed to mature like people. And so if you have a wine that you tried, it's going to have a very different, you know, raison d'etre and sort of zhuzh about it, right? It's going to be a more mellow tannin if you wait 30 years, and probably not going to taste at all like it tasted 10 years prior, but still very good if it's made by a great producer. And I think that's the fun part.
It's funny how like you can taste something and love it, and then through experiences, like you'll hear people, and this is more with spirits, will be like, I'm never drinking rum again. You know what I mean? And I think that can also happen with things like wine, where you maybe really liked Cabernet Sauvignon, but then you kind of got spent on it, and now you're on some Pinot or whatever else grape, and your taste ebb and flow. Totally. You know, sometimes you're into more trashy food. Sometimes you want the high end stuff. And for me, it happens in like, there's waves and years. Like I had a burger year. I had a pizza year last year where I was like, I couldn't stop, you know? And this year's sandwiches.
Oh,
I can't stop getting sandwiches.
So what sandwich?
I'm really down with when I'm in Napa, what is that place right next to Model? The butcher shop. Forgetting it. It's right in the Oxbow, but on the other side. Gott's, Model.
Oh, is it Fatted Calf?
Yeah, the Fatted Calf. I
Oh.
love their little sandwiches. They have 4. They never change them. The muffaletta, the jamon and truffle butter, like just simple like that. But then I also like, there's this place called Junie's in St. Helena. That's also fire. And there's the deli in Napa that I'm forgetting the name of. But there's like places.
Genova?
Yeah, Genova. There you go.
That's
The
a real local
delicatessen.
spot too.
Yeah.
They've got
Yeah.
a lot of good Italian products.
For sure. And that's another thing that I've come to love is like the Italian pantry and just how well they take care and they import and they make sure that they have that stamp so where you know where it's from, and they're really, you know, serious about that. And I think Napa also has that, where they're like, this is my vineyard. You know what I mean?
Totally.
Don't even look at these grapes.
But what's interesting about trends, I mean, what you were just saying in wine is that it's a lot harder to follow trends in wine from a producer perspective than food. You know, with food, we grow a lot of food. We're at the Oasis property. We have a huge regenerative garden, and we actually, you know, now produce food for the farmers market in Yountville town. We grow produce year round. We have all different kinds of fruit trees. And so we can take those different items and constantly innovate.
Yeah.
But the grapes are, you know, we hope that they stay there sustainably. We don't change the varietals that we grow on a regular basis at all. It takes 7 years to mature grapes to essentially market. And, you know, if you want to replant a vineyard, it's going to be another 7 years. So, and expensive. So the way that we look at trends is much more what the winemaker imparts into the wine, or potentially, you know, trying to harvest it or produce it in different ways, but not necessarily swapping up the varietal. So we like to encourage people to think of trends, and you don't necessarily have to abandon the grape as much as maybe the way that you think about consuming it. And even looking at wine, people are moving away from wine to some extent, but I think that thinking about wine as versatile in different ways. So using it as a float in cocktails or incorporating it in different types of products, you know, mixed beverages. There are ways to make wine interesting without necessarily abandoning the things that you like.
What inspires a replant? Because I'll see that sometimes in Napa. You'll see a vineyard, and then the next year it's just all mowed down and they're starting over again. What is the reason for that? Usually, it's
not desirable.
Okay.
Generally.
So that's not a good thing when you look at it. You're like, oh, they're
Well, no.
I'm always like, yeah, they're doing the thing. All right.
It's part of the life cycle of anything, right? I mean, I wouldn't say it's not. we hope to have as few replants as possible, but some of the larger companies have to produce certain amounts of grapes off of land. I mean, if you think about it, your output of grapes is going to directly tie to the volume of wine that you produce. Yeah. So one thing that I think, a lot of people don't potentially think of is that when we lose a harvest, for example, we can't go somewhere else to buy the grapes to produce it. Yeah. If you're buying any other commodity, the strawberries in Central Valley, if they're bad one year, you can potentially go to Mexico. So we can't do that as producers of Napa wines. We have to buy them from Napa. So if everything burns down in Napa or gets smoke tainted, we're done. Mm-hmm. And we have zero revenue. So if you have to replant and wait 7 years before you're going to have a product to market again, right? That's a really big commitment. Definitely. And it's expensive to plant. Mm-hmm. So generally speaking, you get smart about how you do it. You want to maximize your production, but you don't want to overproduce because we are concerned about quality in Napa. Right. And we try to phase the replant. So you're not doing a whole vineyard at the same time. Mm-hmm. And, we try our best, but usually it would be that the production is not the desired output, and larger companies that have to return certain amounts of volume off of the land are more beholden to that. You have, it comes down to dollars and cents, and or disease. There are quite a few diseases out there that would cause you to have to replant. And we're seeing an increase in that because we have less diversity in Napa than we used to on the agricultural side. And so we're seeing a higher incident of disease affect and impact the market. And now there's a surplus of wine grapes, actually. So a lot of people are opting not to farm their vineyards, or they're essentially ripping them out and not replanting.
Are the excess grapes just juiced and held, or how does that work? Like after a while they go bad, right? I mean, what are you doing there with a bunch of grapes left over, like with no home?
Yeah. Unfortunately, if a market, if the demand is lower than the supply, you will see people throw them away. So
you can't even sell them to Franzia. Well, you know what I'm saying? Cause for example, sturgeon, right? Mm-hmm. Some places will part out the meat after they harvest the caviar. But most places will just sell the entire carcass, meat, bones, and everything to cat food companies, So there is no secondary market where you can sell your grapes to.
Oh, there are. There are definitely secondary markets.
Brandy, things like that.
Yeah, there are secondary markets. I mean, there are people who grow grapes who don't produce grapes. There are people who make wine labels that don't own land or produce the wine. Right. They just buy excess juice from somebody and they bottle it and they sell it. But when the consumers stop drinking as much wine, then a lot of those markets dry up. Mm-hmm. So even at the end consumer phase, you have to decide whether or not it makes sense to farm and produce, because there are costs associated with all of that. Mm-hmm. If you're not going to be able to sell it, or you're only going to be able to sell it at the end for a certain price. So what you're talking about is a byproduct of, a lucrative market. Yeah. But grapes are not necessarily a byproduct. They're a principal product of a product and they're expensive to make. Yeah. Or grow.
Definitely.
In Napa, especially.
Mm-hmm. And that brings me to another thought. It's like, how do you price your wine? Like, is there a formula to that? Like what it costs? Does that all involve the price? Because I know that there's some wine that probably costs the same amount to produce, but is different in price.
That's like asking, really, at the end of the day, like, is a Louis Vuitton bag worth more than, a
Kirkland bag beautiful, from Costco?
Yeah. And, I like to say if there's a market for it, then it's priced appropriately.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
But I think there is a reality to, just like with any pricing strategy or any branding strategy, there is a little bit of, here's what it costs and here's what at least I need to make. And then there's that je ne sais quoi of what does the brand need to.
What am I worth, baby?
What am I worth?
Okay.
And we were talking about that. I mean, I think I like to think of our wines as intentionally priced to connect with people. We are not trying to take an elitist position on price, which I'm not condemning. I am merely saying that I would rather be on people's tables than curate a cult following that is inaccessible to most. That's just, I would like to be an accessible face of the wine industry in a lot of ways. And so we lean into that brand. We lean into that. We over deliver for the price point. We want families to be here. We want you to be able to come and see what we do, transparency, and feel like you connect to me and my family when you're drinking the wine.
Right.
Not some, who makes it? How do you find it? Where is it? But that's a cool strategy. Yeah. It doesn't work for everybody.
Yeah. Who does make your wine?
Oh, Aaron Pott.
Badass.
He's a total badass.
Badass.
But he's an incredible artist, but he is also just one of the most amazing people and men that I know. I mean, he has 2 daughters and they grew up in Napa. And so one of the reasons he came to work with us is he really wanted to work with a family property that reflected the multi-generational family businesses that he hopes to see more of eventually in Napa and that used to exist in Napa, the heart and soul. And so we sort of reflect, what his family is, I think he hopes going to be, right? Yeah. And we had a lot more of those a while back, but Aaron just really cares about the community. He really cares about supporting small business. He gets approached by all of the most famous people to produce his wines. Yeah. And he picks and chooses, some of it I'm sure is motivated by this is cool because I'm going to be able to do whatever I want.
Right.
But in a lot of respects, it's an ethical consideration about, I like what they're doing farming wise. And he says no, and he says yes. And when he says yes, it means something to him. Right. And that matters to me. He's not just looking to aggregate brands to aggregate money.
And as the winemaker, he's involved with everything from the farming to the blending all the way through, or how does that relationship work?
Absolutely. So I think it works for different people, different ways, but Aaron specifically takes ownership of that entire process because, my father having the farming background, this is one of the things I actually knew better about than, let's say, producing wine, is that, because wine is a living product, you cannot, if you have bad grapes, you cannot make good wine. Yeah. And so the wine making very much starts in the vineyard. So the more control you have of that entire supply chain and the more impact or feedback that you have in the beginning of the process, the more likely you are to have the desired outcome once you actually start making the wine. Yeah. And so people who buy grapes but don't have that much of a relationship with the grower to be involved in the process, or people who don't, they buy the wine once it's already been produced, there's not a lot you can do. Right. You cannot make good wine from good grapes. And so if you don't like farming, you shouldn't be in the wine business. And if you feel like you can just, slap a label on wine and make a great product, I think some brands have shown that American consumers do see wine like a lot of other products, and that, branding will move things. Wine used to be all about the place and the story. And there's still a home for that, but there are definitely brands that are untethered to place or person that have sold for incredible amounts in the United States. That doesn't happen in Europe. So there, and in most other countries, the story is really the only thing that inspires. And in the United States, that's very much the bucket we fall in. I don't expect everybody to necessarily like our brand, but the reason people connect with it is because of what we do and who we are. Right.
Well, I always think about with the podcast, I'm like, there's 8 billion people in the world. I only need 1 billion. I'm good. I don't need to please everyone. They will come. If you build it, they will come. So I'm sure that you seem to have a pretty loyal clientele over here. So
yeah, I mean, what we are really unique. I mean, what I hear definitely. Constantly.
There's nothing like this in Napa.
No.
At all.
And we have to lean into who we are. We founded this place through the Small Business Administration.
Yeah.
We had to buy the property, refurbish it, and do absolutely everything through the SBA. Because although my family had been in the business for a long time, we were literally land rich, but cash poor. Mm-hmm. And we weren't going to be able to sell our vineyards to generate the income, because then we would lose the most important asset, which are the grapes. And you can't make good wine from bad grapes.
Okay.
So it was an incredible journey to find a seller interested and willing to even finance products. I mean, I was dealing in a marketplace where everybody was buying it all cash. People were spending money, let's say, because more from a luxury perspective than because they cared whether or not that investment would make money. They wanted a winery. They wanted a name on the winery. They didn't care if it was a good investment or was ever going to return on their investment. Mm-hmm. They wanted, it's like the second home, the yacht, then the winery, right? That was the market that we were in.
Right.
And, we have really overcome so many hurdles to do that and produce it. But I knew that because of where we were starting, we weren't going to be able to outspend a lot of the people here and create, here's a helipad, fly in on your helipad and have some, caviar. And look, there are people who want to do that, and there are people who offer it, you know, that's just not, that's not who we are. We are very much we believe in creating beautiful edible landscaping. We believe in rescuing animals and having people, sort of observe with their experience, a working farm.
Right.
That's what we are. And we are family oriented, family friendly, and every bottle of wine really talks about who we are.
Yeah. Okay. You guys are killing it, This place is beautiful. But now we're going to get into your other life. And you studied to be a lawyer. Do I have that right?
Yeah.
Okay. What got you into law, or even on that trajectory?
Well, I was hoping to be a spy, and I went further than hope. I ended up going to Georgetown for college.
Okay.
I studied many languages. I've been to 72 different countries, and I really wanted to end up somewhere. And at that point in time, once I was in college, I had some idea of how to maybe get there, and the place and agencies that could facilitate. So I applied, and really the feedback was, on paper, you're fabulous for this job, but you're way too memorable. You walk into a room and no one is going to forget you. And we need spies, which I guess is a compliment.
Yeah.
But they're like, we need spies that kind of come and go and don't, create a lot of dynamic energy.
Right.
It's like, okay.
You're a superstar. You're like, thanks.
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess me was standing in the way of where I thought I needed to be. Yeah. So that was interesting. But I understand what they mean, that, I like to go and lead and inspire. And I get very passionate about things. And so I make gestures, I talk big, I engage with people, and I get really passionate about conversations. And so I could see that. I also realize now, I got to interview Valerie Plame the other day. She was the covert CIA agent who was outed by Scooter Libby. And
what are you interviewing her about? What is?
Well, I had the great fortune of meeting her, and I asked if I could interview her for a group of 260 people at the Spy Museum.
Okay.
And so we did a fireside chat, and I interviewed her about.
Cool.
Yeah, it was amazing. But what I realized is that, I think it's probably really isolating to be a spy.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't share what you do with anybody.
Right.
Even those closest to you. And I think she didn't say this necessarily, but it caused me to reflect that, everything I guess happens for a reason, it would be very difficult for me, for my friends, not to really know who I am.
Yeah.
And not get to talk to me about what I do, because I'm very transparent and
about what
wear
you
my
do.
heart on my sleeve. I talk about what I do, what I believe in, and I speak up. And a lot of people don't do that. But for me, justice is incredibly important. And so if I see something wrong, I call it out.
Okay.
I can't play that, oh, well, it's not my backyard. So we're good.
You're like, I need to be involved fully.
Well, it's just when it's wrong and I can do something about it, I think we all owe our communities the responsibility to jump in where and when we can.
Yeah.
So we can't be all things to all people, and we certainly can't attach to every cause. It's impossible.
Yeah.
But when you find yourself uniquely suited to do good and right a wrong, you should do that. Are you going to walk by the child that is in the middle of the road about to get run over by the car, or should you jump in? There are a lot of people these days that won't engage.
Let's drive by. Be like, I hope he's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, literally.
And I think that that's because we have a lack of community sense today.
Right.
And that makes me really sad. And I have I think there are a lot of reasons why that's come to be, but community's been always a very important aspect to me. I realize that I'm very driven by justice, right, wrong. And those aren't as clearly, right and wrong are not always clearly defined.
Yeah.
But I believe that, you have to really know yourself, and you have to follow your convictions, and you have to be authentic. And so that's true to make a really strong brand. But I think that's also really true to be the best private individual that you can be.
Did the people that told you that you were too dynamic, were they the same people that told you should be a lawyer?
No, I think what ended up happening really is I kind of realized, okay, well, if I have this skill set, and I really like studying, and I really like academia, and I really like public service.
Yeah.
What is another job that's maybe would benefit from being a bit of a presenter and somebody who's dynamic?
Yeah.
And I realized that, being a trial attorney was probably a potential fit, but I didn't know anybody who did that. I mean, my mother was a designer and my father was in the wine business. So,
okay.
it was probably the opposite. Like, everybody who has lawyers for parents are like, wow, why don't you want to be in the wine business? And I was, I wanted to go and hang out in the crime lab. I was like, let's do this. But I read serial killer books. I mean, I used to scare every date you could even imagine.
Yeah,
my whole life, I really did.
It's still a thing to this day. I don't get it. Every lady is like, murder podcast.
Oh no, I was before those existed.
I know.
That was the thing.
You're reading murder.
Oh no, I had VHSs.
Oh, okay.
Yes, and reading. Oh, I think I did my
Michael Kuklinski.
I did my fifth grade report on Charles Manson. I mean, I was always into this stuff.
What does the teacher say at that point? Did they have a meeting with your parents being like, what the fuck? I bet it was San Francisco, so they were like, it makes sense.
It's like, didn't Charlie grow up down the street?
Yeah, right?
No, yeah. It's like,
oh, Charlie.
Yeah. Yeah, he blows my mind. I've watched a bunch of his parole hearings, and it's just he's like, I don't want to leave jail. Why are we still doing parole hearings?
Do you have a favorite serial killer? Not to sound like that shouldn't be a favorite one, but
Well, I have a favorite only because I have Charles Manson, I feel like I had a childhood bond with the story, right? And I kind of, he inspired ultimately a lot of what happened. I had a personal friend who passed away, wasn't a serial killer, but that really motivated me to continue to do the work that I did. She was my age, and we went to camp together when I was 10, and she ended up getting murdered for money in Wadmalaw Island. And I felt, I had a real personal tie to somebody who'd been wronged. And I realized that I just, you never right that wrong when you're in the criminal justice system. I think that's an important thing for people to know. But I really realized that I wanted to bring some closure to people and right some of the wrong that I could. But then my but when I got to the DA's office, our office got grants for cold hits. And I was actually one of the first published authors in admitting really old evidence, because California had a big transition. Well, the entire country had a big transition in evidence law while I was in law school. And so timing is everything. And I ended up getting published on the admission of basically old evidence, which is very helpful for, serial killers, anybody who had DNA taken, but, wasn't ever actually in a CODIS connection, CODIS being, before DNA was actually used in crimes, they collected materials, and states go through and they'll reopen cases to check DNA that was recovered many years ago. But it's a backlog and it's a money thing. A lot of times people have the material they need to solve cases that they couldn't solve back then because they didn't have the science, but they don't necessarily have the staff. And even if they have the staff, how are they going to prove the case 30, 40 years later? And so I was sort of a valuable asset on, what do we do with old evidence? How do we get it in? But we opened up a case and it was linked to the Night Stalker. And so even though Richard Ramirez was in prison at the time and he's since died, we decided not to ultimately prosecute the case. But I was reopening. I mean, I felt like Dirty Harriet. I mean, I was like, oh my God. I mean, I was like opening things and everything was handwritten. It was like, sir. I mean, I could just envision these like detectives' offices with smoke, and secretaries taking handwritten notes of like, a man in a green suit came in and says he might have a tip for you. I mean, it was a nuts, box of materials, and they got stuck. And it was one of his earlier cases. And so I got pretty fascinated by the guy. But again, I think it's just about personal connections, like when you learn about somebody and where it took you in life. And that one was me being involved in a really interesting case that had national implications. So.
That's so crazy. Wouldn't be the last time for you, right?
I don't know. Yeah.
So the DA's office, what is your like entry level? What are you doing when you first get there?
Oh, well, what I did, this is actually, I think, a hilarious story, but I'd applied to the district attorney's office. I went to the career counselors in law school. And of course they were like, you're never going to get a job there. So dream on, sister. And I was like, okay, well,
watch me.
My dad definitely always taught me, ask what's the worst thing that's going to happen.
Right.
And 2, don't take no for an answer.
Yeah.
Which I try not to repeat to my kids because no is an answer sometimes when you need it to be. But I, they said that they just don't hire people right out of law school. So I was still a student. And I sent my resume directly to Kamala Harris, who was the recently appointed DA at the time. She'd come over from Alameda County. Right. She was not obviously as well known as today, but I sent my resume directly to her and she sent it downhill to the hiring department. And I think they thought because it was coming from Kamala as opposed to...
Then it's like, you need to hire this person kind of thing?
Yeah, but I didn't know her.
Good idea.
And they didn't ask her why she was sending it instead of it piping up the, regular chain. And so I just sent this very impassioned letter to her about how I'd always wanted to be a spy and, well, everything that...
Right.
If anybody's gotten this far, just
all
heard.
All
the other stuff. And she... and for Take Your Daughter to Work Day, actually, I ended up going on a trip with a woman who worked at the DA's office. I didn't know that at the time, but it turned out. And so her second in command hired me, but he hired me for the wrong job.
Ooh.
He thought I was more advanced in law school than I actually was. And I was like, oh, shit. Well, I can't turn the job down because I feel like that's going to expose I don't know her. And I just, I need to figure out a way to make this work. So I ended up calling the state bar and I said, is there any chance that I can do this job as a first year student? And they're like, well, I guess technically if you take second year classes,
right,
while you're doing the job, then you've started your second year. So
it doesn't matter.
I guess technically like that works. So I called them on the first day of the job and I showed up and I said, so here's the thing. I'm not a second year student, but I've already called the state bar and I had the solution ready for them. And I think they were so inspired by the fact that I had, identified the problem. I didn't misrepresent, but I solved the problem.
Yeah.
And then came in so eager to work that they let me keep the job.
Okay.
And so I did absolutely anything that they asked me to do. And this is the advice. I'm now a law professor, actually.
Okay.
And this is my advice that I would give anybody in any career, to be honest with you, is in order for you to really fully understand the job that you are taking on, you need to understand all of the jobs around you. And if you ever want to be really successful, you have to also understand what you like and don't like. So say yes to everything and then make a decision from personal experience about what you don't want to do.
Right.
But remember that some of those things are part of the job, and being willing to do anything as part of a team is sometimes part of the job. And when you work for the government and you work for the district attorney, you don't have a lot of support staff. That's not how that works.
Yeah.
So you have to you do your own copies. You don't have a paralegal. You don't have a secretary. And I think a lot of people maybe have these glamorous visions of what, government work is. And that's why a lot of people go to work for law firms, because they want a big paycheck.
Right.
I'm not motivated by a big paycheck. I'm motivated by what's right and wrong in a job that I can ethically get behind. And so I was okay with compromising, let's say, some of those conveniences. Yeah, I'm better educated than most. And yes, I make 1/10 of what all of my colleagues make, but I can wake up in the morning and say, I could do that if I wanted to do that, but I'm really proud of what I do. And that mattered more to me than a paycheck.
So the day-to-day work of a lawyer, if you can just boil it down to layman's terms.
Well, in the DA's office, somebody gets arrested for anything. And so as you're a younger district attorney, you would get the case from the police. Effectively, there's a unit that decides whether or not they're actually going to pursue charges or not.
Okay.
I think that's one of the funnier myths when people are, on TV and they say like, I've decided to drop the charges. People actually don't get to decide that. They're young people.
Don't decide.
No.
Wow.
No, the district attorney makes that decision.
Okay, got it.
So even if you
So
don't
no
want,
one has ever dropped charges except for the district attorney.
correct. Or a police officer can say like,
Can you plead to drop charges? Can you send a letter to is that a thing?
you absolutely can, and the district attorney can say, I'm sorry, but no.
Absolutely not. Okay.
And it happens a lot because you have a lot of people like in domestic violence scenarios where or gang cases. You think a lot of witnesses are going to testify against their gang mates? No. And they don't usually write a letter to request dismissal. They're like, hey, come on. He was doing it because we told him to do it.
They attacked us first. We gotta.
Yeah. And I've had those cases too.
Yeah.
And the reality is that, that's actually where my expertise is when we had uncooperative witnesses. How do you effectively get the information in that you need to prove the case when your witness is going to be uncooperative? So I had one case where we had an MS-13 gang member. We had to extradite from North Carolina, and oh God, he was on the stand and just would not. I mean, we gave him use immunity. He would not answer any question. And finally we were like, I need you to take off your clothes. And his attorney starts going bananas. He's like, what are you doing here? And the judge was like, you all better have a really good reason to, unrobe this guy. And I was like, well, he just testified that he didn't know anything about MS-13, but I've seen his booking photos. And I don't know about you, but he has MS-13 tattooed in pretty much every inch of his body. So, we were effectively trying to say like, we're not going to prosecute you, but we're not going anywhere either. Like, let's.
Right. We know who you are.
Yeah. And he wasn't like incredibly helpful, but yeah, I mean, you need to do what you got to do. So uncooperative witnesses, or those that quote want you to dismiss the case, domestic violence, it's very common because it's a family, it's a father, it's a husband, it's a whatever. And that people are afraid of retaliation.
Right.
Witnesses don't want to participate a lot of the time.
Got it. And then so as the DA, and this might be a dumb question, but you're on the prosecution side, like you're not defending anything, right?
No. So public defenders and district attorneys are essentially the same position on the opposite sides.
Got it.
So they are both government
I see,
attorneys, and we work together actually very closely because most of the cases that go through the court system
Right.
are represented, all of them are represented by the DA, but most of them are also represented by the public defender. And so
Right.
you appear in any county, you appear in front of, with the same attorneys from the public defender's office all the time.
That's what I've always asked myself about lawyers, like the morality of a defense lawyer when he probably knows that the person did it and they're still in there like making the case and doing their jobs, do you guys get along? Like, is that side, what is that entail? And have you met anybody like that or?
I've met lots of people like that. And, I personally couldn't be a defense attorney.
Right.
But I've started to change my perspective on that a little bit. And even when I was early in my career,
Yeah.
I mean, the distinction between right and wrong are a little bit less clear sometimes,
Right.
I think, than we hope. And you come out of law school very wide-eyed and thinking there's, everything's black or white. And then you start getting into the nuances and messiness of life
Yeah.
and messiness of situations. And sometimes, I think sometimes, we realize as we grow older that life is just a lot more gray and ambiguous. And I think The Wire did a pretty decent job of showcasing that a little bit. But I think I realized that in order for our system to work the way that it's set up, you have to have advocates willing to defend the law. So they're not always necessarily just defending a person. They're defending the way our system is an adversarial system. And it demands that in order to avoid corruption, that the police follow the law and the courts follow the law. And if they're going to put somebody in jail, they have to meet their burden of proof, the government. And so making sure that that happens and that they don't get railroaded, you need strong advocates on both sides.
Right.
And as I, have had my own personal adventure with what I consider government bad acts, I realized that a lot of people, really do deserve, it's true that a lot of people get sort of fingered for things that they didn't actually do.
Right.
And that happens a lot less today than it used to. But the reality is that, it does happen. And so in order to have that check and balance, you have to have people who are willing to do it. Now, could I do it? It would be very difficult for me to represent somebody to the point of knowing they might get released back into the community who had done certain things. That would be very difficult for me.
Right.
And so I preferred being on the opposite side where as a DA, I could dismiss a case. If I didn't think somebody did it, I had complete control to say, I'm not going to charge this case. So I was able to show mercy, show grace through disposition to follow the law by dismissing a case. Whereas a defense attorney doesn't have that freedom.
Right.
They have to defend their client the way that the client wants to be defended. So I didn't like that.
Do most cases get dismissed by the district attorney or the judge?
Well, to dismiss a case, once you've filed the case,
Right.
the district attorney can request a dismissal.
Okay.
But the judge ultimately has to dismiss the case.
Ah, all right. That's crazy. Whoa. And
there are different reasons. Like,
right.
If it's a felony, for example, you have to show that you have enough evidence to keep
Right.
somebody in jail. And if you aren't able to do that, then the court will dismiss it for lack of probable cause,
Yeah.
is the terminology. So, there are a lot of reasons cases get dismissed. And even up to right before a jury verdict.
Yeah.
You may go through trial and then all of a sudden, the case just doesn't look the way that everyone thought it was going to look.
When you're in school, do you do mock trials like in classrooms?
Yeah,
Or
but
is
they're
it-
nothing.
Right. Is it more like sit in the courtroom and just listen?
That's the best way
That's
to
what
learn.
do it. Got it.
I used to watch court TV, not the dramas,
Like the boring ones? Like
Oh, totally. Well,
Yeah.
I think they're fascinating. I love
Got you.
watching, district attorneys and people who are in court have a very unique skill set, and they know how to ask questions and get the information. And of course, they're good and bad attorneys, but if you really want to get better at trial work, you accept every hearing that you can in court, and you go and you watch other people. And back to sort of the theme of authenticity, you need to be your own district attorney. Not everybody's style is going to work for everybody.
Okay.
And I also, you have to realize too that like you have different witnesses in different cases. So it's almost like you put on a different play every time. You have different juries, you have different whatever. Right. And so you really get, you have to feel out your judge, you have to feel out your witnesses, you have to feel out your jury. And so you're constantly evolving your style depending on who you're talking to, what your case is. Yeah. You don't want to be overly serious about marijuana because your jury is going to be like, what are you talking about?
We're in California.
Not a big deal. And I think, and I think it's important too to remember, like, nobody's trying to throw the book at anybody, or at least like I wasn't.
Right.
Do you want to pause for?
Yeah, sure. We can take a little break. A little 2 minutes.
Because the audio.
Yeah. We're in Hoopes, baby. Those are the people.
Oh yeah, no, I mean,
the people
I don't mind
paying the rent. Look at them, just buying the wine. Look at you, got good sales, man. People walking out here with 6 bottles. Nice job.
I don't mind.
Well, here we go. All right, we're back.
So, I mean, you don't want to be overly dramatic about like, hey, we're in trial here today because of a graffiti case.
Right.
But the reality is that means that the defendant didn't want to plead for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, we have to hold people accountable. If we just say like, okay, well, this isn't a big deal, then everyone's going to think, well, yeah, it says graffiti is illegal, but no one's ever going to charge me for it. Nobody's ever going to actually follow through with prosecuting me.
Right.
So you could find yourself on a jury that feels a little bit like, why are we here? Mm-hmm. But that's part of the process that we have to be willing to go through with what we start.
Yeah. Jury selection is wild. I was involved in that. And there's people that straight up like lie. They're like, raise their hand. They're like, I don't like these people. And they're like, well, you got to go.
Ish.
Right.
I mean, we, in San Francisco, it's very difficult to pick juries. And, I mean, I somewhat joke that, a jury is not really ultimately a jury of your peers. It's a jury of the 12 people who couldn't figure out how to get out of jury duty.
That's a good way to put it.
I mean, I really have always wanted to be on a jury.
Yeah.
And I would never get selected. But
have you ever been on a jury?
No way.
Still to this day.
They'd never pick me.
Can you apply to go?
No.
Like a preferred, like.
No, but the minute I get called in, they're like, you were a DA? Hell no. I mean, the other side's going to kick me. So, yeah. But, you start.
They're like, Lindsay?
Yeah, exactly. They're like, not you. So the thing about, though, is that everybody has learned, now that, quote, if we say this, we are going to provoke a response. We're going to get kicked off the jury. So if you get called, say this. One, if anybody is listening to this, if you were sitting at that defense table,
yeah,
you would want thoughtful members of the community to give you a shot, listen to the evidence, and you would want people to do their job as a citizen. So I hope people start to reconsider their obligation for jury duty. And I think it was our entire system relies on the fact that we get a diverse set of people, which means like not the 12 people who just don't have anything to do.
Right.
It's people who are active members of the community, who have kids, who have, it's not, quote, convenient. But every single juror that I've ever spoken to says that it's actually changed their life serving on a jury and being part of that process. And I think we all need to realize if this is part of our community, we have to do it. So there's my, PSA for today.
Okay.
But beyond that, we've since, we have to like voir dire.
Right.
And actually get through to some of these people. And I've had people say to me like, I hate the cops. And I'm like, well, so who do you call when somebody's breaking into your house?
Right.
And they're like, well, the police. I'm like, so you appreciate that they do serve a function
right.
in the community that you might sometimes need.
Right.
because you're not going to call me if somebody's breaking into your house, and you're definitely not going to call David. No offense, but maybe, but you're not going to call my son.
Boricua Batman.
Yeah. Well, maybe, but I don't know. You might have that secret ability.
Vigilante.
But yeah, no. So, I mean, and police do a lot of really great things. They just get a really bad rap for, like anything, the percentage that, it's a smaller percentage than not, but the percentage that abuse their power.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
that's why I'm a huge believer in holding government accountable, because people don't trust the government unless you show that you're willing to hold them accountable, and you do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm the first person to raise my hand when I see misaction. We used to do that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Police would bring me cases. I'd be like, I'm not charging that. No way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like what you did. Or I don't like how this all happened.
Is there sort of a pressure there, or like a conflict where they're like, no, like this needs to happen?
Sometimes. And
Right.
sometimes it would go to your boss and say like, she's being
Kamala
a whatever.
Harris?
Well, yeah. Yeah. I mean, she used to have a lot of beef with the police because she
Right.
refused to charge death penalty cases. And there was a police officer who died while I was at the department and on the job. And when they ultimately charged his murderers, they refused to seek the death penalty. But that was not something she was willing to do in the office. And so
Really?
she was at big time odds with the police department.
Whoa.
So you gotta believe you gotta do what you think is right. And so police officers have discretion to arrest, but district attorneys have the discretion to go forward with it.
Right.
And part of our responsibility of the community is to go forward with anything we think we can prove and that is a crime. But we also have discretion to disposition it in a meaningful way. So if
Right.
somebody's a drug addict, sometimes, jail is not the solution. I mean, drugs are very different today than they used to
Right.
be. But, similarly, a lot of people are selling drugs because they don't have education
choice,
and they don't have a choice and they don't have a job. And so giving them the tools to get out of that situation, in my mind, is way better than chucking them into jail.
Right.
And then giving them a felony that's going to basically prohibit them from getting hired ever or voting and being part of the change.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think, I believe in alternative solutions.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Across the board.
Appreciate it. Okay.
You have to write the punishment to the crime.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a DUI, like you don't throw people in jail for 5 years for a DUI the first time, because you take their license away and you make them think about it. And, that's the way to start.
Right. A little bit at a time. Wow, that's crazy. And then as far as the death penalty, you said Kamala Harris, was against that. Do you have any involvement in like that kind of thing? Like where capital punishment was part of the consequences?
Yeah. I mean, she had an office policy that capital punishment was not something we would seek under any circumstance.
Right.
When I worked at the Attorney General's office, the death penalty was still legal, but I didn't personally. Once you work in the appellate division, you are just dealing with cases that already exist. They've already gone through trial, and you're dealing with the post-conviction.
Right.
You're not changing the situation. So to some extent, I potentially touched some things, but the death penalty hasn't been legal in California for a long time. And really, I think the discomfort around it and, has made it an ineffective punishment and or not something that anybody really was seeking for a long time.
Yeah.
So in a way, like in my career, I've never had to deal with it.
Okay. Got you. And so you did this for how long?
Well, I did both jobs for a long time. But my last case really at the DA's office was in 2017.
2017.
And then I went back to teaching. So I teach a mandatory first year course at UC Law, and I've been doing that for 3 years.
Okay. So you're very much in the mix. Do you still get calls from colleagues that are still in the game for advice? Is that legal? Like, can you do that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I get called a lot. it was a real passion of mine, and I made a lot of incredibly strong connections.
Right.
And, you know, I get asked to help with cases quite often, actually. And I can do that as any other consulting attorney would do. I work on things as they need.
Are you the Hoopes family lawyer?
Yes.
And so that we'll get into that,
which is a full-time job
I know,
these days.
right? You've been battling the county now for a little while, right?
Yeah.
Napa County. And what is the, in layman's terms again, what is the basis of that conflict?
Well, it's actually as boring as it's a land use conflict.
Okay.
So I think the easiest way to think about it is, you know, you have different layers, sort of a mini civics lesson. You have different layers of government. You have municipal government,
Right.
which is your local government. You have state governments, and then you have federal governments. And the local government has the ability to enforce anything from the state or the feds, but they also have the ability to zone and make their local communities safe. So to create laws that are unique to a particular locality within certain areas.
Right.
And so when you buy or use a property, if you're a restaurateur, you have to buy a commercial property or rent a commercial property. And then you marry your liquor license to the commercial property. But the liquor license comes from the state. And so the real crux of this issue is, in my opinion, that the county is trying to regulate beyond their jurisdiction is the term.
Got it.
So they're trying to percolate into what the state regulates. And they are creating a number of civil rights violations in the process
Right.
that impact small businesses, a la equal protection. And some of the writers who've, I think a lot of them, most of them don't understand law. And law feels a little bit complex, so people boil things down to
Right.
overly simplistic terms.
Yeah.
And so when people saw civil rights, I think they're like, oh, what does that mean? Well, in the context of land, right, you have property rights. And so if a government takes away property rights that they're not allowed to take, that's what's called a civil rights violation, a violation of any of your constitutional rights, treating you differently than another business, treating you differently than another person. Those types of things are all within the concept of they're violating your constitutional rights.
Right.
If they have laws on the books that are not legal, then that's a violation of your constitutional right. So telling you can't do something that you should be allowed to do is a violation of your constitutional right. And, you know, in another way to look at it is not everything that the government says you can't do is something you can't do. But it takes somebody to fight it in order for that question to get resolved. Because obviously a local community enacts something because they want to, but it doesn't mean that the community isn't racist or that their community is not doing a lot of things that are correct. And so you have these checks and balances like the judicial system or the state government or the federal government to keep local governments in check, because local governments by and large are elected by, you know, not that many people, and they aren't necessarily legally trained, and they're humans. And so people make mistakes all the time. So you have to be able to appreciate that, you know, sometimes people make mistakes. And, you know, it used to be illegal to have an interracial marriage. It used to be illegal to do a lot of things. And guess what? They enforced those laws. They enforced them all day long. And it was because the people in those communities that had power didn't want to see, you know, mixed races.
Right.
That doesn't make it right. So just because, you know, people don't want to see small businesses flourish because people like their monopoly in land ownership and in large corporate businesses in Napa doesn't mean that they're doing the right thing.
So do you think that these monopolies have a hand in what's happening and they're slowly kind of buying up all the land and doing what they want with the Napa Valley?
I can't purport to know exactly the motivation of why the county is doing what they have been doing.
Mm-hmm. What's
but,
up?
Hey, buddy. What would you like, honey?
She's on mom duty. It's all good.
Oh, you want this bigger? Here we go.
Yeah, but I want something.
Want something new? All right, let's see.
I'm loving the Mario, by the way.
Yeah, my son dresses up every day in a costume. Which
I
one
like
do you want?
that. Wish I could do that.
You can.
Yeah, but after a certain age, they're just like
Maybe.
Chef Dave dresses up like Batman on the weekends. I don't know.
Well, I don't know. I mean, my dad was like, "Are you going to let him go to school like that?" And I was like, I mean,
Why not?
Why
Yeah,
not?
that's cool. Has he gone to school like that?
Oh yeah.
Oh, sick.
I mean,
Probably inspires other kids.
you have to pick your battles,
Right.
and sometimes fighting with a 4-year-old on the way to school about what he's wearing when, it's.
Does it really matter?
Does it matter?
No,
I don't know,
doesn't.
but that's what I was
They're
saying.
gonna get it dirty anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Where were we? Lawyering, Napa County battle. How long has this battle been taking place?
Oh God,
Yeah.
too long.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is the most outrageous government.
Do you feel like there's a little
Action.
bit of personal vendetta here?
I think there's absolutely personal vendetta.
Uh-huh.
I think there is CYA going on. I think there is hubris. I think there is just a lot of poor leadership.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of misinformation going on between the various entities. I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of things that I really hope for the community that the county takes stock in and learns from.
Yeah.
But
Are you the only winery going through this?
no, I'm the only winery
Fighting it.
fighting them now, but the number of people that have come to me who are afraid of their government. These are business owners, taxpayers, just frankly a population that shouldn't feel paralyzed in fear because of their county. I mean,
Right.
that just means that something really wrong is going on. The lack of transparency, the lack of communication, the just outrageous abuse of power, because you
Right.
just don't see people who are productive members of the community
Mm-hmm.
and who are business people afraid to talk to their government and afraid to talk to them about just really stupid things. Like the reality is, they don't have anybody trained and nobody's read their own code. So I don't know how they know whether or not people are breaking the law or not, but why can't you sit down and have a conversation about it? Or why can't you sit down and have a compromise? I mean, part of the role of government is to figure out how to make things work
Yeah.
and figure out what's best for the community. And the people who really, frankly, support the largest part of, your only industry.
Mm-hmm.
Your economy relies on wineries, and no one is going to want to come and do business here if the county continues to treat hardworking, productive businesses
Right.
like this. Who would invest? You'd be crazy to invest in Napa today.
Mm-hmm.
You'd be nuts.
Okay. The monopolies that which you speak of, which we probably know the last names of them, right? Is it like 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, or is it a large number, or like where's the
Well, let me put that comment into slightly more perspective.
right?
Whether it's intentional or unintentional, the way that the law is being interpreted is having a lot of unintentional consequences, or intentional, that disproportionately impact small business and make it impossible for small businesses to compete even at a ankle size share in the wine industry.
Yeah.
And it cuts off critical economic functions from those wineries. And the reality is that, let me give you an example. In the 80s, for example, a lot of people were getting very creative about what wineries were doing. So people were hosting concert series and weddings, and the county decided that they needed to refine the definition of what a winery sort of is and is not, and make a more clear list of what a winery is, so that wineries didn't morph into massive event centers and Disneyland. But I think the reality is that had already happened.
They have.
and all the wineries that were existing at the time said, great idea. We're not going to give up our rights to do any of this stuff.
But all the new guys. Yeah.
You should definitely make it impossible for them to do it. And so we don't ban weddings, for example, in Napa, but it's like a 4-letter word, and only 5 or 6 wineries can do it. And in fact, Visit Napa Valley advertises Napa as a winery destination. The hotels advertise Napa as a winery destination. But in order to actually have your wedding somewhere, you are limited to going to these 5 people. What does that do? It creates a monopoly, because the supply is limited and the demand is intentionally huge. We advertise it.
You can't do weddings on this property.
No. Well,
in your eyes, yes. In Napa County's eyes, hell no.
I don't.
Right.
I don't.
Right.
But that would probably be the answer.
Yeah.
But our situation is even dumber than that. I mean, I grew up in Napa in the 80s. And even today, more so today, in order to sell wine, people need to try your wine.
Yeah.
Period. People need to put lips to glass. You walk into the grocery store or any store, and there is almost an infinite number of labels that are out there. And people can't try it. And so if they don't know a brand, if they haven't tried it before, they're very unlikely to buy it. Sometimes that happens, obviously. It's a price decision or a label. But generally speaking, people buy the wines that they've tried at a restaurant, or they've tried at some sort of community event that the sommelier recommends to them, or a friend recommended. So there's a real personal connection to consumer purchases in this space.
Yeah.
And a lot of it has to do with them trying it. And people might like some of your wines and not all of them. So they don't necessarily want to buy them all to see what they like. They want to try them, and then they'll be directed to the wines that they want.
Right.
So ultimately, it's just like anything. Where you go to a farmer's market, you try all the different peaches, you try all the fruit, you decide which ones you're going to buy. I mean, this is like when you're eating, you try a restaurant, and if you don't like it, you don't go back. It's just like, that's how it works. That's exactly how these products are sold. And so the county has taken this very odd position with these small wineries that were entitled before 1990. And said that they are not allowed to do tastings, which is something that nobody defined until 1990. So after they already existed. And as somebody who grew up here in Napa in the 1980s, I can guarantee you that every winery was doing tastings.
Of course.
And I can guarantee you that not only that, but the idea of building a winery where people couldn't come and try your wine would have felt like building a car without an engine.
Right.
I mean, that's
we can
absurd.
Sit in it.
It's like having a bar where you can't serve alcohol.
Right.
It's like you can store it.
Now.
You can store it.
Yeah.
Well, if you choose to have non-alcoholic. But you can sit here and you can look at it, but you can't actually drink it. I mean, that's like people, for whatever reason up here, have all drank this Kool-Aid because the county's been saying it for so long. And I think what the county's done is making people go through and re-entitle so that they make money, and or they make it impossible for new, quote, market entrants. And what they've been doing is they're going after all these old wineries because the original founders are old, dying, have Parkinson's, you name it. And so there are only a few of us around. They went after me because they thought we were, quote, new. But it turns out what they've learned since then is that we've actually been up here in the Valley since the early 1980s. We weren't a new entrant to the market, and we weren't naive to the wine industry and all the licenses that you have to have. And I am a lawyer, and I know how to interpret statutes, and I know how to read the laws. Their interpretation is unintelligible to me. I mean, not only that, but their laws, and everyone who's been around for a long time knows that the winery definition ordinance has been a, quote, gentleman's agreement, in that there were a lot of provisions that were problematic, but we all just sort of go along to get along until the county is being ridiculous about interpreting it to the point where you just can't operate a business, or you don't know what's right and what's wrong. So you're constantly looking over your shoulder in fear. That is the definition of an unconstitutional law. If somebody of average intelligence cannot tell what conduct is or is not prohibited, then they cannot be on notice of how to follow the law. That is the definition of an unconstitutional provision. So if you go in and you ask, what is a marketing event? You should be able to get an answer. What is a tasting? Because if I'm allowed to do tastings or I'm not allowed to do tastings, I need to know what that means. And that sounds silly, except that I have a state license that says I'm allowed to have my retail customers consume on the premises. And subdivision E says the state governs the operations of a winery, and the county cannot eliminate that right. What does that mean to you? You don't have to go to law school to see, okay, well, the county can't tell me people can't consume on the property because the state is telling me people are allowed to consume on the property, and the county can't get rid of that law. So, I mean, it's pretty obvious to me.
Right. Jesus. And so do you think you're at the end of this? Halfway through? At least?
Who knows?
Okay.
I mean,
you're here. You're chilling.
Well, 2 years
you're open.
I mean, 2 years ago, the court said that the county was unlikely to win.
And
that is trigger talk for anybody who's been in government service, that this is not likely a violation of the law. And I should not spend tax dollars pursuing something that is not likely to succeed, because this isn't my private money. This is your money, your taxpayer dollars. And they have a constitutional obligation to the defendant in that situation to not pursue a prosecution that a court has already reviewed from an evidentiary perspective and said, you are not likely to win. That is a constitutional right, that you cannot pursue things against people that are not actually violations. We all know this in the context of, like, the police can't harass you just for, like, being black. They can't just harass you because they don't like what you're doing, even though it's completely legal. Sorry, that's not how this works. And if they know that, and the court's already told them that, the fact that they're wasting everybody's taxpayer dollars is crazy. But they're doing it because they want to outspend me. They want to put us out of business before the court actually resolves the legal question that would expose them in some negative light.
Do you think that those monopolies or those bigger players are maybe paying into that, the lobbying for all the smaller businesses to close so they can, buy up all the land, make up all the money in the valley?
I think that would be
or is that too tinfoil hat?
I think I think it's possible.
Okay.
I think it's possible. I think that the federal subpoenas that have been percolating around Napa County show that there is some level of political corruption that needs to be righted. We have a lot of, I think what I've seen is we have a lack of leadership, and we have a lot of stuff that really needs to get cleaned up. And so I wouldn't be surprised if there are some, unfortunate deals or relationships between, one example is all of our code enforcement information was being sent to a private trade organization here in Napa. Now, why would the police, for example, send a police report about you randomly to your boss or to a trade organization of restaurateurs?
Where you're like, what is that?
Why would
they don't have any authority, right?
Well, not only that, there are laws about confidentiality too. But why would they send investigatory materials to a trade organization in restaurants? It would only be to make you look bad or to conspire. I mean, nothing nothing legitimate.
Right.
So, and why did it get there?
Yeah.
Why did it get there? I don't know. So
I think that I'm fucked with the wrong person. You know, I don't think they were gonna ever saw you coming.
Well, that could be, but honestly, nothing disgusts me more than government abuses. Because like I said, I took my position so seriously, and you wield incredible power. And with that incredible power comes incredible responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And you are playing with people's lives, livelihoods. I mean, this is how we feed our family.
Yeah.
This is everything that I have is invested into this business. I support my father, my children. We live here. My kids go to school here. I employ people. Like, we matter to maybe a small percentage of the world, but we really matter to that small percentage. And we pay all of our taxes. We contribute to the community in every way, shape, or form that we can. And we've never received a citizen complaint ever on this property.
Mm-hmm.
Ever. Not even since this lawsuit happened. This was all fabricated from within the government. So that, to me, is a really bad sign that the motivation is improper. And I have never seen a district attorney's office or any government entity pursue a case where the judge, multiple judges, have told them, I'm not so sure you're right. Because this actually happened in a parallel case before that, where a different judge said the same thing about the same interpretation about the same legal issue. And the county did not accept that. And they hired another law firm and basically just outspent that defendant.
Mm-hmm.
And in our case, they brought the case again. So it's just intimidation. It's just waste our money so that we can't fight it anymore. And that's what's created this incredible universe of fear. And what I really implore wineries to do is we need to start getting together and showing that, we do represent a huge component of the economy. And we really do need to band together to advocate for our needs in the community. We can, if we're divided amongst ourselves, we're never going to see change, because we're never on an individual basis. We don't really matter. And the county can just write us off as, well, she's crazy, or she's, well, her situation was different.
Mm-hmm.
But if we come together with a joint grievance and say, you're not protecting our property rights. You have as much of an obligation to us to protect our property rights as you do to the citizens to enforce the law. You can't just come and shut down our businesses.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just come and put us out of business without a legitimate purpose and reason.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody is advocating for that. And the trade organizations that pretend to, quote, protect the wineries aren't doing anything. So we apparently need to do it ourselves. And I very strongly encourage people to speak up, because if people don't push back and hold the government accountable, it'll never happen. I mean, it's just like, imagine if every rotten egg in the police department got away with what they did, then that's just going to breed more rotten apples.
No justice.
There's no justice in that.
Did you, going back to, you came over and took over the business because your dad had fallen ill. Was that a hard time for you? Like, I have to leave this career before I want to, or, did it take a long time to get through that? Like 2-3 years of like self discovery and, what am I? What is my purpose?
Yeah, I had a complete identity crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like everything that defined me, it didn't disappear because I was electing a path, but it felt very much like I was rudderless. Okay. The things that were most important to me, I was having to walk away from. The things that defined me in, not everybody's job needs to or does define them. But my job was very much an extension of my beliefs. Yeah. And so from that perspective, I think I was doing it because my motivation was, it was the right thing to do.
Right.
And so that never left me. I still feel very much that way. And so I felt, I didn't want to leave. I wasn't ready. I was very much on a fabulous upward trajectory. I think I could have had a long, very healthy career. And then, you know, I saw my boss, if you will, go extraordinarily far in her career. And there was a lot of, I think, looking around thinking, well, what could have been? You know, she made her way to the White House. Like, where would I be today? And I still have touches of that. Most of my, 75% of the bench in San Francisco worked with me, either in the public defender's office or in the DA's office, or were judges when I was there. Right. And so my goal was to be a judge at some point. And I look at that and I say, like, wow, you know, if I just stayed there, like maybe I would have achieved the goal that I thought I had. But after a while, so no, it wasn't 2 or 3 years. I think it's a constant journey of sort of defining ourselves and figuring out sort of what to do with where we elect, but also circumstance. You know, life is a combination. Yeah. You know, I think people who think it's all just what's happening to me are misleading themselves. We make choices, you know, for sure. And it's both. But and at first I felt lost because, you know, I was getting into the wine industry, which in a lot of respects, you know, we provide a really important emotional connection to people or to things, but it felt a little superficial to me. You know, we're sitting around all day long talking about like, oh, you know, like, what does it taste like? And I mean, I say that sort of in a joking tone because those things matter, but you know, at the end of the day, like it's not life or death. Right. And I had been, and I came out of life or death. So I was like, okay, you know, I joke with my staff. I'm like, I'm good at customer service until level 5. If it goes beyond level 5, I'm like, sir, if you're that thirsty, like maybe something else is going on. You know, like you didn't get your bottle of wine. I'm so sorry, but like, it's just not the end of the world. Right. Like, and so I think it gave me interesting perspective. I'm very glad I spent time out of Napa to give me perspective on the industry and just in life and business in general. I think helps keep things in tow, but I don't know. It's a constant journey. I do think that my ability to advocate for small businesses and small farmers, I never asked to be here. Right. But law is an incredibly empowering education. And I do tell my students pretty regularly that even if they don't go into law, they will benefit from this education. And I'm kind of living that now, where I feel much more capable of dealing with a lot of things, from simple contracting to my taxes to just dealing with stressful situations. I learned a lot of that from the way that they help you think in law school. And my ability to, I think, bring a voice to a community that felt also rudderless has given me purpose in my local community. And that's been, I think, really nice. I mean, for example, like in town, in Yountville, they love us because they see that this is a real family winery. Like we're actually involved in the community. Yeah. We go to the farmer's market. We, you know, have an animal rescue sanctuary, and there are a lot of elderly people that live in town. Well, we're like the highlight of their day. You know, we come and we engage, and they like knowing a family member down the road and getting to know my kids and the dogs. And, you know, it's like, it's small town stuff, but it really matters to people. And we're the real deal. We're not just a name that never shows up in Napa and, you know, flies in on their jet and leaves after they've gone to the fancy parties. Like we live here. And I think, you know, that we've been able to give the community something they didn't have. Hell yeah.
You're contributing. And that's way more than a lot of people do. You know?
Well, we're trying.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's plug the business. Address, website, personal phone number, you know? Where you at?
Well, I'm really easy to find. Okay. Any email address at Hoopes Vineyard is going to get to me. So if you can't remember how to spell it, like you're good. But info at works.
Reservations at.
Yes. They all work. Yeah. And they all get to me. But my cell phone, I'm joking. Our address is 6204 Washington Street. You can find us at www.hoopesvineyard.com. And we are family friendly, dog friendly. You can buy farm produce any day. You can come buy a bottle of wine and leave. You can come buy a bottle of wine and drink it. And the idea is that this is a make your own adventure. So no formal tastings. It's come and enjoy, I think, what is truly the heart and soul of Napa, which is a family-owned winery that is more than just its wine. We are a regenerative farm. So we are a working farm that you get to breathe, see, smell, and touch.
I love that. I think we end it right there, baby. Sucio Talk, Hoopes Vineyard. Napa Valley. Your episode 161.
Whoa.
I'm going to commandeer this area again for other podcasts with other chefs.
Yeah, please do. Woo! It's a pretty view.
I know. Pretty view.